Gene Hackman didn't depart in peace. Instead, he left behind a fortune capable of shaking an entire lineage, over $80 million in cash, real estate, undisclosed stocks, and investments that no one dared mention. But behind those staggering figures was a nightmare tearing apart every familial bond. Each dollar Hackman left behind didn't just buy mansions and million-dollar paintings, it also bought the darkest secrets, late-night calls and desperate, unsent letters, money reeking of dread, betrayal, and dreams crushed before they could hatch. Gene Hackman didn't leave a legacy, he left a curse. Once likened to an immortal monument of Hollywood, a place where faces that once stood under the spotlight are easily forgotten, even the brightest stars eventually fade silently into the night sky. In his final years, he chose an unusual path, completely different from the public's perception of a silver screen legend. No grand tribute parties, no tearful farewells before the cameras, no memoirs revealing final secrets. Gene Hackman left Hollywood in the most gentle and detached way. He vanished. New Mexico was no strange land to Gene Hackman. Since the 1980s, he had purchased a home in Santa Fe, a place just secluded enough, just wild enough, for him to escape the blinding glare of the movie capital. The winding red dirt roads, the dark pine forests, the howling wind at dusk, all created a perfect setting for a star to close the final chapter of his life. Locals often whispered about the tall, thin old man with a face etched with sharp wrinkles, riding his bicycle along the small hills every day. "He looks like someone I've seen before," a grocery store clerk once said, but no one was sure. Gene Hackman almost dissolved into the air of this small town, becoming a faint shadow blending in with the elderly living out their final years in silence. Hollywood tried to lure Hackman back, offers from ambitious young directors, scripts written specifically for him, none could shake the wall of silence he had built around himself. "I've said everything I need to say," he once replied briefly in a rare interview. At 90, Hackman was no longer interested in fame or fortune. The only thing he sought was peace, a luxury he had never had during his lifetime on film sets. But that silence wasn't entirely a choice. Rumors began to spread, and the darker aspects of Hackman's life gradually surfaced through whispered stories from insiders. It was said that his health was declining faster than anyone had predicted, fleeting heart pains, unnoticed bicycle falls in the middle of the road. The Gene Hackman of his final years was a ghost of his former self. Hackman's family, according to unnamed sources, was not as harmonious as it appeared. He had 3 children from his first marriage to Faye Maltz, a 30-year marriage that ended in a bitter divorce. His daughter, Elizabeth Hackman, once publicly spoke about her father's cold detachment as fame devoured all the time he should have spent with his family. "He was always working, always somewhere else," she said in an interview. The relationship between Hackman and his children was never truly healthy. Although he provided well financially, family meals, teaching his children to ride bikes, or reading bedtime stories existed only in the imaginations of the Hackman children. The accumulated indifference over the years turned into an unbridgeable gap. Even when Hackman remarried Betsy Arakawa, a pianist 30 years his junior, the atmosphere between him and his children remained tense. Many close sources revealed that Gene Hackman's decision to live in seclusion was not merely for rest, it was also a way to escape the simmering conflicts within his own family. Family gatherings became rare, phone calls grew shorter, and even Christmas was no longer an opportunity for reunion. Hackman never said it, but those close to him understood. He feared the disappointment in his children's eyes. He had tried to make amends with money, with assets, with lavish gifts sent from the West Coast to the cities where his children lived. But money, like the characters he once played, could not buy the most precious thing: connection and forgiveness. That estrangement reached its peak when Hackman completely retired from Hollywood in 2004 after his final role in Welcome to Mooseport. No farewell to colleagues, no tribute party from the studios that once considered him a golden goose. Hackman vanished like a strange wind, leaving behind only vague rumors about a tragic, solitary, and stubborn monument. Santa Fe, in Gene Hackman's final years, was like a vacuum isolated from the world. He spent most of his time in a small wooden house, reading, writing, and painting landscapes. Those fortunate enough to encounter him in the local supermarket or gas station described a gaunt old man with deep-set eyes that still shone with unmistakable sharpness. It was said that Hackman liked to sit alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains red. Those were perhaps the rare moments he felt completely free, no camera flashes, no false praises, no troubled relationships to disturb him. Just him, the wind, and the silent, unspoken thoughts. But more frightening were the rumors of a private fund, a shadow fund that Hackman had established in the mid-90s. No one knew exactly how this fund operated, where the money came from, or its ultimate purpose. Among the discovered documents was a handwritten letter from Hackman to himself, like a financial diary. The letter stated, "I built this not to leave behind wealth but to leave behind control." That statement haunted his children, as it proved one thing: Gene Hackman never wanted his money to fall into anyone else's hands, not even his own family. As rumors about Hackman's health spread, Hollywood media began digging for the final clues about his life. Some said Hackman had secretly written a will years ago, carefully dividing his assets into various accounts, ensuring no one could contest them. Others claimed Hackman established an anonymous charity, where he poured most of his fortune as a silent atonement to the children he had abandoned. The less he appeared, the more Hackman became the subject of countless whispers. Conspiracy theories and fabricated stories surrounded Gene Hackman, but in his small house in Santa Fe, he quietly passed his final days, leaving behind not just a brilliant career but also mysteries that persisted even after his eyes closed. The only way to end a story is to disappear from it. Gene Hackman wrote his own ending by leaving the world in a way no one expected. The news of Gene Hackman's passing was announced on a gray morning before the sun had even peeked over the red peaks of New Mexico. The news was quiet, unheralded, much like his reclusive lifestyle for the last 2 decades. But as soon as that small piece of news quietly appeared in a local newspaper, it triggered an undertow not only in Hollywood media but within the Hackman family itself, where secret doors suddenly swung open after years of being sealed shut. The Hackman family never truly understood the extent of his wealth. With the image of a Hollywood legend who held 2 Oscar statuettes and graced the most prestigious red carpets, no one doubted that Hackman possessed a vast fortune, but exactly how large, where it was located, and how it was hidden, these were questions that even his closest relatives couldn't answer. Gene Hackman's discretion and reclusiveness weren't just personality traits, they were an art, a strategy he executed flawlessly until his final moments. Initially, his family believed everything would be straightforward. An old handwritten will, notarized from 2001, was found listing a few obvious assets: the house in Santa Fe, a bank account in California, and a vintage Hudson Hornet that Hackman had kept since his youth. The total estimated value was less than $5 million, a paltry sum compared to his reputation and illustrious career. But the more they turned over old documents, the deeper they delved into seemingly anonymous bank accounts, and a completely different picture began to emerge. The name Gene Hackman, it turned out, didn't just exist in the world of cinema. Since the 1990s, at the height of his career, Hackman had begun quietly building a complex financial network interwoven with real estate, stocks, anonymous investment funds, and money discreetly transferred abroad. Hackman wasn't just a brilliant actor, he was a master of concealment in the financial world. The first to discover this lead was the family lawyer, an elderly man who had been with Hackman since the 70s. Amidst the dusty papers found in a wooden chest in the Santa Fe warehouse, handwritten letters and internal memos about a series of clandestine transactions were discovered: investments in fledgling tech companies, suburban Nevada land funds, solar power plants in New Mexico, all registered under shell companies with no direct link to Hackman. But tracing the chain of transactions, each dollar led back to a single account, the original account Hackman established in 1993, right after winning his second Oscar. The total value of the assets, after piecing together all the clues, was estimated to exceed $80 million, a figure that shocked even his closest confidant. But what truly stunned the family wasn't the amount of money but how Hackman had hidden it for all those years. No one knew exactly how he did it, with whom, and why he chose such secrecy. In some mysterious transactions, Hackman even used aliases through trust accounts established in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore. The biggest question remained: why did Gene Hackman hide his fortune from his own family? Did he not trust them, or were there deeper secrets yet to be revealed? A hypothesis began to circulate, not from the press but within the Hackman family itself. The children who grew up in the coldness of their famous father now realized they had never truly understood him. Hackman wasn't just emotionally distant, he was financially distant, as if afraid that revealing a fraction of his wealth would drag his life into endless disputes. Therefore, he chose to erect walls, creating financial layers so impenetrable that even his own children couldn't reach them. The appearance of this mysterious fund immediately sparked clandestine investigations. Lawyers, financial experts, and even private detectives were hired to trace the fund, but all reached dead ends. Gene Hackman had prepared for this moment long ago: phantom accounts, layers of shell companies, untraceable cash transactions. Every time the family took a step forward, Hackman seemed to have been a decade ahead. When the family lawyer released the official asset declaration, most of what was recorded was just the tip of the iceberg: the Santa Fe house, the vintage car, and a few bank deposits. The rest, the true fortune, still drifted somewhere in the financial shadows, known only to Hackman. And now that he was gone, that secret became an unsolvable puzzle for his closest relatives. It was in those frantic searches that the Hackman family realized a stark truth: there were moments when they never truly belonged in Gene Hackman's life. He lived like a solitary legend, loved money in his own way, hid it like a part of his soul, and took those secrets to his grave. That vast fortune, instead of becoming a family legacy, was now the wreckage of a man who chose to abandon everything, including his own family, to protect one thing: absolute control. The old wooden door of the Santa Fe house creaked dryly as it was opened. Dim yellow light streamed through the doorway, seeping into the dusty space where the scent of decaying wood and old paper blended into the distinctive aroma of houses long devoid of human presence. The Hackman family stood silently before the scene, a frozen world where time had stopped long ago, leaving only shattered pieces of memory scattered across the gray wooden floor. They didn't cry immediately upon hearing of Hackman's passing. The loss was not simply the departure of a father, husband, or grandfather. It was like the aftershock of a subterranean earthquake that had been smoldering for years, now erupting, sweeping away everything from kinship and trust to long-buried secrets. That evening, gathered around the old wooden table, Gene Hackman's children opened each wooden box, each old envelope found in the corner of the warehouse. No one was prepared for what they were about to face. Inside those faded envelopes were not wills or financial instructions, as they had hoped, but handwritten letters never sent, with Hackman's familiar trembling script. The first letter was written in the winter of 1995, when Hackman had just finished filming Crimson Tide. He wrote to Christopher, his eldest son, whom Hackman hadn't spoken to directly for 15 years. The letter was short, just a few lines. "I know I've never been the father you wanted me to be, but you have to understand, I was never meant to belong to anyone, not even my own family." Those words were like a cold knife slicing into Christopher's chest. He wasn't surprised to read them, but the pain of reading them from a yellowed piece of paper instead of hearing them directly from his father still took his breath away. The following letters were filled with memories and regrets. The one sent to Elizabeth, his youngest daughter, recounted evenings Hackman spent alone in the living room, watching old family tapes. Hackman wrote, "I always thought I was protecting you by keeping my distance. I wanted you to live without the shadow of my fame. But now I wonder if I was just protecting myself." That letter was written on Elizabeth's 30th birthday but never left the drawer. Each letter was like a fragment of Hackman's soul, revealing hidden aspects that no one in the family had ever known. He was not just a famous actor or a Hollywood legend. He was also a lonely man torn between the desire to protect his family and the fear of losing himself in the role of a father. But it wasn't just the letters. The deeper the Hackman family delved into the old drawers, the more pieces they found of that complex puzzle: mysterious financial agreements, unexplained money transfers, and most disturbingly, a list of secret beneficiaries. Gene Hackman somehow had created a separate inheritance list with none of his family members' names on it. Instead, millions of dollars were transferred to strangers: a childhood friend in California, a former assistant who had retired in the 80s, and even a waiter at Hackman's favorite restaurant in Santa Fe. Why did Hackman choose them, and why was his own family excluded? No one could answer, but shock and resentment filled the room like crashing waves, submerging each family member in an inescapable emotional storm. The first argument erupted that night. Christopher slammed his fist on the table, his voice hoarse with anger. "He never trusted us. Everything we thought we knew about him was a lie. He lived his whole life as an actor, and even in death, he was still acting with his own family." Elizabeth burst into tears, not from anger, but from pain. She hugged the old letters to her chest as if they were the only remaining piece of the father she had idolized. Childhood memories, Sunday mornings when Hackman sat reading the newspaper by the window, all suddenly faded before the harsh truth. Betsy Arakawa, Hackman's second wife, sat quietly in the corner of the room. Throughout their years together, she had never truly understood the man she called her husband. Hackman's weekly disappearances, rushed phone calls, unannounced trips, all now formed a complete picture. Hackman wasn't just distant from his children, he had built walls even between himself and his life partner. But the emotional earthquake didn't stop there. When the family lawyer released the list of secret accounts Hackman had left behind, the whole family was nearly paralyzed. A huge portion of the assets, over $20 million, had been secretly transferred by Hackman to an anonymous charity just months before his passing. This organization had no specific name, no public information, just a cold acronym: GH Legacy Fund. No one knew how this fund operated, where the money would go, or what Hackman's true purpose was, but one thing was certain: Gene Hackman had chosen to trust strangers instead of his own family. In the old house, tears fell onto the wooden table, soaking through the old letters. the Hackman family had not only lost a father and husband but also the last chance to understand, to reconcile, to hear from him the belated apologies. All that remained were torn letters, blurred memories, and an eternally unanswered question: who was Gene Hackman really? A failed father or a lonely soul until his last breath? Some families are born to bask in the limelight, but others are born to bear the shadow of a legend, a shadow so large, so heavy, that even with millions of dollars in assets, they feel no different than being shackled. The Hackman family is a perfect example of that curse. The name Gene Hackman was not just a source of pride for Hollywood, but also a silent haunting for those who carried his blood. Christopher and Elizabeth, two children who grew up in the shadow of their father's fame, never escaped the label Gene Hackman's children. Even as adults with their own lives, the Hackman name followed them like a shadow. Their father's success did not leave motivation but an invisible curse of comparison. Any achievement they made was compared to his Oscars or iconic roles. Never enough. Never within reach. And when the secret doors to Hackman's wealth opened after his and Betsy Arakawa's deaths, that burden did not lessen, it turned into golden shackles, glittering but tighter than ever. As the lawyers began reading the 100-page will, each word seemed to detach from the paper, hovering in the silent room in Santa Fe. The assets of over $80 million were clearly listed, from real estate shares scattered across California and New Mexico to art collections, vintage cars, and secret investments no one in the family had ever known about. But along with those assets, Hackman left a series of inheritance conditions that were chillingly strict. No family member was allowed to exploit the Gene Hackman name to write memoirs, make documentaries, or sell any of his private stories. No one was to publicly dispute the assets in the press for any reason. In particular, there was a secret fund, named by Hackman as the Untouched Fund. That fund was established in the 90s, and for over 30 years, no one, not even his wife, knew exactly what was in it. Only one condition was clearly stated: anyone in the family who touched this fund would immediately forfeit the right to inherit all remaining assets. It was a forbidden zone, a sacred land Hackman kept for himself, a symbol of his absolute control, even in death. Ironically, while alive, Hackman and Betsy Arakawa were the image of a model peaceful marriage. The couple lived in a self-designed wooden house on a 12-acre plot in the mountains of Santa Fe, far from the scandals of Hollywood. Their longtime friends, Daniel and Barbara Lenehan, still remembered the peaceful afternoons, Hackman at his easel, Betsy quietly brewing tea, and both smiling contentedly amidst the vast nature. They called it the ideal life, but no one knew that beneath that peaceful facade, Hackman never stopped controlling. Betsy herself once told a close friend, "Gene is the perfect husband, as long as I don't touch what he calls his personal legacy." That personal legacy was not just his film career, but also the right to control his own story. No one was allowed to rewrite Gene Hackman's history, not even his wife and children. Christopher, the eldest son, felt the price of bearing the Hackman name most keenly. He dreamed of being a director, but every time he stepped onto a film set, his father's shadow loomed, turning him into a flawed version of Gene Hackman. Even when he switched to business, Christopher couldn't escape the expectant eyes, a kind of expectation that stifled all personal individuality. When the will was announced, Christopher almost laughed aloud. He won. Even in death, he controls everything. Even our thoughts. Elizabeth, the youngest daughter, the child who always hid in unfinished paintings, had hoped her father would leave her some freedom, but the cold will killed that last hope. Not a single line mentioned emotions or personal messages from Hackman, only rules, clauses, and threats of disinheritance. The vast fortune was like a weight tied to their feet, dragging them to the bottom of the ocean of expectations, where Hackman sat coldly watching each child struggle. Amidst all the disputes, rumors about the Untouched Fund spread throughout Hollywood inheritance circles. It was rumored that Hackman had secretly transferred money into off-the-books investments or even established an anonymous charity under another name. No one was sure, as Hackman's lawyer confirmed, "Even I don't know what he hid there." Betsy had tried many times to ask her husband, but each time, Hackman only replied, "There are things you shouldn't know, and neither should our children." Now, with both of them gone, those things they shouldn't know became a haunting, gnawing at each family member. No one knew whether they should protect that legacy or shatter all the secrets Hackman left behind. And amidst the tears, the arguments tearing apart the Santa Fe living room, a bitter truth emerged: the greatest legacy Hackman left behind was not money or fame, but a broken family under the overwhelming shadow of a legend no one dared to touch. If the roles on screen were just the tip of the iceberg named Gene Hackman, then the manuscripts, notes, and secret documents found after his death were the cold, dark, and long-buried depths of the sea of memories. The study on the second floor of the Hackman house, where no one was allowed to enter for years, not even Betsy, finally opened behind. The old oak door was a world no one had ever known, unfinished film scripts gathering dust over the years, personal diary pages with handwriting that was sometimes firm, sometimes trembling, and mysterious financial notes hinting at shadowy connections to the ghost of old Hollywood mafia. The unknown scripts, Hackman's real-life film. Although he was an acting icon, few knew that Hackman always yearned to direct, not commercial films, but a film about his own life. Among the found documents were at least 3 unfinished scripts, the last of which left the Hackman family speechless. The last confession, the draft began with the sentence, "If there is an afterlife, I want to be born without anyone knowing who I am." This script, according to Hackman's notes, was a disguised autobiography recounting every hidden corner of his journey from a poor Marine to an Oscar-winning star, but not omitting the cracks in his first marriage, his children's tears, and the secret deals to keep the Hackman name at the top. There were handwritten notes in the margins of the script, Hackman in dialogue with himself, "Being famous sometimes means selling your soul. How many people have I betrayed to keep the name Gene Hackman?" That script was never sent anywhere. It sank with dozens of other unfinished dreams, dreams that Hackman never had the courage to turn into reality. In addition to the scripts, the family found 4 personal diaries spanning from 1995 to 2022. The early pages were filled with sweet memories with Betsy Arakawa, spontaneous trips to Japan, France, Italy, where Hackman said that only when he left America did he feel truly normal, not Gene Hackman. But as time went on, the writing became more distorted and confused. Many pages were smudged with ink, perhaps from tears or Hackman's trembling hands on his loneliest nights. December 23, 2005, Christopher didn't call. I can't blame him. I once told him, "You'll never escape my shadow." Now, I think I'm the shadow that's been following my son. Never letting go. August 4, 2016, Betsy is sound asleep, but I'm not. I fear that when I die, this whole house will turn into a battlefield. No one knows how many secrets I've hidden. I just hope that when I'm gone, everyone can forgive me. But I don't believe that will happen. Some pages were torn out, leaving only deep pen marks on the paper, as if he had written things no one should know, then erased them himself. Hackman's financial documents were the strangest piece in the secret room. In addition to the usual real estate and stock investments, there were millions of dollars in transfers to obscure private investment funds, mostly starting in the late 90s, around the time Hackman was gradually retiring from Hollywood. The suspicious point was that in the transaction list, there was the name Frankie "the Fox" Catalano, a notorious Hollywood mafia boss once investigated for money laundering and protecting independent film studios. According to rumors from those who worked with Hackman, he and Frankie had known each other since the 70s when Hackman was filming in New York. No one knew why Hackman, who seemed so proper, kept in touch with a notorious gangster for decades. A small note in the financial documents, handwritten by Hackman, "Old debts paid, one way or another." No one understood what those old debts were, a loan from his youth, a secret agreement to keep his private life secret, or had Hackman stepped into the dark corners of Hollywood where films were just the surface, and behind them were dirty money, extortion, and silent contracts? The untouched fund itself also had ins and outs involving shell companies, most of which had traces of Frankie Catalano. Betsy, despite being closest to Hackman, knew nothing of these connections. When the truth was revealed, she was gone, taking with her the absolute trust she had given to the man she loved for decades. Gene Hackman was gone, but the secrets he left behind were still slowly sinking the family, bit by bit. Each diary page, each unfinished film script, each obscure financial transaction all formed a silent will where Hackman confessed to himself, "I am a legend on screen, but also a liar in real life." As the silent funeral closed, as the last wreath withered by Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's grave, what remained was not just a vast fortune or the silent Oscar statuettes on the glass shelf. What weighed heaviest, haunted the most, were the fragmented memories, the questions that would forever go unanswered. Over $80 million in net worth, mansions stretching from Cali to New Mexico, discreet investments whose origins no one could fully trace, all were neatly contained in the will read aloud by Hackman's lawyer. But upon opening the treasure trove, the family did not find a sense of victory. They found irreparable cracks, the simmering disputes between Hackman and his children over the years, the vast distances that money could not bridge. The unsent letters found among the diary pages, each letter beginning with the sentence, "I'm sorry." But that belated apology was not enough to soothe the years his children grew up feeling like flawed versions of the great Gene Hackman. Hackman loved his children in his own way, but that way was as cold and harsh as the studio lights. He left everything, except a gentle hug, a heartfelt compliment, a moment of placing himself on equal footing with his children. And when Hackman closed his eyes, the family understood that the legacy was too heavy, heavier than a mountain of gold, for it was filled with expectations, untouchable legacies, secrets no one dared to uncover. Gene Hackman, in the eyes of the world, was a monument. But Gene Hackman, in the eyes of his children, was a closed room, a father living by film schedules and contracts. They remembered him not through fishing trips or warm dinners, but through magazine interviews, rare moments of seeing their father on the red carpet, near, yet so distant. Some nights, Christopher Hackman, the eldest son, stayed up all night in front of the screen, rewinding each of his father's films, trying to find a real glimpse of him behind the roles. But the big screen only reflected what Gene Hackman wanted the world to see, not what he truly felt. Hackman was not a bad father, he was just a victim of the very glory he created, lost between being a Hollywood icon and being a normal man. Just when everyone thought Hackman's legacy was confined to assets and fame, a final secret was revealed. Hackman had established an anonymous charity with an initial sum of $10 million, dedicating all his film royalties after his death to fund scholarships and build schools for underprivileged children across America. The fund was named The Other Gene, a subtle play on words alluding to Hackman's true self, the poor boy who was expelled from school, who worked as a waiter, who dreamed of having a pair of intact shoes to wear to school. Hackman wrote in a letter left for his personal lawyer, "If I could relive my life, I would want to start in a place where no one knows I'm Gene Hackman. I want to be a normal child with shoes that aren't torn, with meals without worrying about tomorrow." In this secret way, Hackman atoned for his own traumatic childhood and also sent a final message to his children: "I hope you understand, I never forgot who I was. And I hope you will find yourselves without living in anyone else's shadow." Memories of Hackman were not just photos on the walls, but the size of those left behind, the tear-blurred scenes in family movie nights. Glory once encased Hackman's life in a glittering aura, but when the Hollywood lights went out, all that remained was the echo from the past, where an old man still wrote letters to his children, knowing they would never be sent. Gene Hackman was gone, but his story of gold, tears, and memories that money couldn't buy remained, an unfinished film waiting for others to continue telling. Gene Hackman departed, leaving behind a mountain of money, but his family only picked up the shattered pieces of trust, love, and opportunities for reconciliation that had turned to ashes. Oscar statuettes could be dusted, but the wounds in their hearts, nothing could heal.